The air in the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was thick with the scent of expensive lilies and the metallic tang of chilled champagne. For Eleanor Vance, it was the smell of a world she had never quite belonged to, despite 40 years of marriage to a man who had breathed this air like oxygen. At 70, Eleanor was a woman of quiet elegance, her silver hair coiffed into a soft bob, her posture as straight as the spine of the classic novels she used to teach at the local high school. But tonight, that posture felt brittle. She sat on a velvet-cushioned stool in the center of the massive stage, the focus of 300 pairs of eyes. The spotlight was a physical weight, hot and blinding, turning the audience into a sea of blurred tuxedos and shimmering evening gowns. Beside her stood Julian, her only son. He looked every bit the Manhattan golden boy, tall, tan, with a smile that suggested he had never known a day of hunger. He was the CEO of Bright Future, a charity that had become the darling of the Upper East Side. He leaned into the microphone, his voice amplified to a silky, charismatic boom. "Ladies and gentlemen," Julian said, his hand resting almost possessively on Eleanor's shoulder. "Tonight we've raised millions for the children, but we have one final special item for our secret auction. Something or someone very dear to my heart." Eleanor smiled tentatively. She expected a tribute, a plaque perhaps, a thank you for the decades she spent supporting his father, and the years she spent helping Julian build this empire after his father's tragic passing. "My mother," Julian continued, his tone shifting into a playful, mocking lilt that made Eleanor's stomach flip. "She's a classic, a real vintage model. She's great for advice you didn't ask for. She'll knit you a sweater that's 2 sizes too big, and she'll tell you the same story about the 1970s until you want to scream." The crowd chuckled. It was a polite, high society sound, but it felt like the slap of a cold wave. Julian's grip tightened on her shoulder, his fingers digging into the silk of her dress. "But let's be honest. In this fast-paced world of tech and crypto, what's the value of a boring mom? Who wants her? Do I hear $2? The laughter grew louder, no longer polite. It was mocking. Eleanor felt the heat rise from her neck to her cheeks. She looked down at her lap, her hands trembling. She thought of the nights she had stayed up helping Julian with his homework. The 2 jobs she worked when his father's first business failed. The way she had comforted him when he was a boy afraid of the dark. $2! A man shouted from the front row, holding up a glass of bourbon. "I could use a new cook." "Sold!" Julian barked, slamming his hand down on the mahogany podium. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "Sold to the gentleman in the front for the price of a cup of bad coffee. Sorry, Mom. I guess that's the market rate for relics these days." Eleanor's heart didn't just break. It seemed to disintegrate. She looked at Julian, searching for a wink, a sign that this was a poorly judged joke. But his eyes were cold, focused on the camera at the back of the room. He wasn't looking at his mother. He was looking at his brand. Beside him, Sienna, Julian's wife, adjusted her diamond choker and leaned into the mic. "Don't worry, Eleanor. We'll make sure your new owner has a nice, quiet corner for you to sit in." The humiliation was a physical, suffocating force. Eleanor tried to stand, her knees weak, her dignity stripped away in front of the very people she had spent her life trying to impress for Julian's sake. But before she could move, a voice cut through the laughter. It wasn't loud, but it had the resonance of a cathedral bell. $5 million. The room went dead silent. The laughter died in throats. Julian froze, his mouth slightly open. From a table in the shadows at the very back of the room, a man stood up. He was tall, perhaps 60, with steel-gray hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. He wore a simple dark suit that cost more than most people's cars, yet he wore it without the peacocking vanity of the other men in the room. "I'm sorry?" Julian stammered, squinting into the darkness. "Sir, this was just a bit of fun. A roast. We aren't actually—" $5 million, the man repeated, walking slowly down the center aisle. Every eye followed him. He moved with a terrifying, calm authority. "But not for the woman. I'm paying for what she's carrying in that vintage Chanel bag of hers." Eleanor instinctively clutched her purse. Julian's face went from pale to a sickly shade of gray. "Mr. Thorne," Julian said, his voice cracking, "I didn't realize you were coming tonight. Marcus Thorne, everyone, our biggest benefactor." Julian tried to clap, but no one joined him. Marcus Thorne didn't stop until he reached the edge of the stage. He didn't look at Julian. He looked directly at Eleanor. His eyes weren't mocking. They were sharp, observant, and oddly protective. "Eleanor Vance," Marcus said. "You don't remember me, do you?" Eleanor searched her memory, her mind racing through the thousands of faces she'd met at these galas. I'm afraid I don't, Mr. Thorne." 30 years ago, you taught English at St. Jude's, he said quietly. You gave a scholarship to a kid from the docks who had nothing but a talent for numbers and a mother who was dying. You told him that the world couldn't take his mind away from him. A flicker of a memory. A bright, angry boy named Marky. Eleanor nodded slowly. "I grew up, Eleanor," Marcus said, "and I started counting things. And lately I've been counting the money moving through your son's charity. It's funny how the numbers don't add up." Julian stepped between them, his charm replaced by a desperate, aggressive energy. "Marcus, let's talk in the office. This isn't the place. My mother is tired. She's confused." "She's not the one who's confused, Julian," Marcus said, finally turning his gaze to the younger man. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "I'm not just a donor. I'm a senior special agent with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, and this gala is officially over." The chaos that followed was a blur of motion. Men in windbreakers with FBI emblazoned in yellow across the back appeared from the kitchen entrances and the main doors. The elite of New York began to scream, chairs scraping against the marble floor as they scrambled for the exits. Julian grabbed Eleanor's arm, his grip bruising. "Mom, give me the bag," he hissed in her ear. "The blue folder inside. Give it to me right now or we lose everything." Eleanor looked at her son, really looked at him. She saw the sweat on his brow, the madness in his eyes, and the utter lack of concern for her. She remembered 3 months ago when he had come to her house in the middle of the night, begging her to sign papers. "It's just a medical proxy, Mom, in case something happens to you. I want to make sure you're taken care of." She had trusted him. She had signed without her glasses, moved by the apparent tenderness in his voice. "Is it true, Julian?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Did you use me?" "I saved us," he snarled, pulling her toward the back stairs. "Dad left us with nothing but debt and a name. I made that name mean something. Now give me the folder." Eleanor looked at Marcus Thorne, who was leaping onto the stage. She looked at her son, the boy she had birthed and breathed for. In that moment, Eleanor Vance realized that the boring mom Julian had mocked was the only thing standing between him and the abyss. And for the first time in 70 years, Eleanor decided she wasn't going to be patient. She wasn't going to be quiet. "No," she said. She didn't hand him the bag. Instead, she reached inside, pulled out the blue folder, and threw it off the stage, watched it flutter down like a wounded bird directly into Marcus Thorne's waiting hands. Julian's face twisted into a mask of pure rage. "You old bitch!" he spat. He lunged for her, but the FBI agents were faster. They tackled him to the ground right there on the velvet carpet, the crown jewel of the Vance family ending up in handcuffs amidst the remnants of a $2 joke. As they led him away, Julian screamed back at her. "You think you're safe? You signed those papers, Eleanor. You're the owner of record. If I go down, you're coming to a cell right next to mine." Sienna, her daughter-in-law, stood by the podium, watching the scene with a cold, calculating detachment. She leaned over to Eleanor as the agents approached. "He's right, you know," Sienna whispered, her voice like a snake in the grass. "We made sure of it. You're not the victim here, Eleanor. On paper, you're the mastermind." Eleanor sat back down on the stool. The room was empty now, save for the agents and the echoes of her son's betrayal. Marcus Thorne walked up to her, holding the blue folder. "We have to go, Eleanor," Marcus said softly. "The drive to your house won't be safe. They'll be coming for the rest of the records." "Who?" Eleanor asked, her voice hollow. "Who else is there?" Marcus looked at the folder, then back at her with a look of profound pity. "Your son wasn't working alone, and he wasn't the one who came up with this plan. We think your husband's death 10 years ago was the first move in a very long game." Eleanor's world tilted. Robert? Her Robert? "He's dead," she whispered. "I saw the wreckage. I buried the casket." "You buried a casket filled with sand, Eleanor," Marcus said. "And tonight, the man who bought you for $5 million is the only one who can keep you alive long enough to find out where your husband is hiding." Outside, the sirens began to wail, a dissonant symphony cutting through the New York night. Eleanor Vance took Marcus Thorne's hand and stepped off the stage, leaving her old life and her $2 value behind forever. The black SUV sped through the rain-slicked streets of Manhattan, its tires hissing against the asphalt like a warning. Eleanor sat in the back seat, her hands folded neatly over the Chanel bag that had almost cost her her life. Beside her, Marcus Thorne was focused on a tablet, his face illuminated by the cold blue light of spreadsheets and encrypted messages. "I don't understand," Eleanor whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. "Robert died in a private plane crash off the coast of Maine. The NTSB report, the insurance, the funeral. I held his hand every night for 40 years. How could he be hiding?" Marcus didn't look up immediately. He tapped a final command into the screen and then turned to her. His expression was no longer that of a grateful former student, but of a man who had seen the darkest corners of human greed. "Eleanor, Robert Vance didn't just run a business. He ran a network," Marcus explained. 10 years ago, the SEC was closing in on him for a massive Ponzi scheme involving offshore construction. If he had stayed, he would have spent the rest of his life in a federal penitentiary. But if he died, the investigation would stall, the insurance would pay out millions to his distraught widow, and the money he had already stolen would be clean. "But I never saw that money," Eleanor protested, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Julian and I struggled. We nearly lost the house in Scarsdale. Julian had to build Bright Future from the ground up." Marcus gave a grim, joyless smile. "That's what he told you. That's what the world saw. But look at this." He handed her the tablet. On the screen was a grainy, long-lens photograph taken 6 months ago in a sun-drenched villa in St. Bart's. A man was sitting at a patio table, his back to the camera, but Eleanor would recognize that slope of the shoulders anywhere. Beside him, leaning in to whisper something, was Julian. Eleanor felt a wave of nausea. Julian knew? All this time he knew his father was alive? Julian didn't just know, Marcus said. He was the courier. Bright Future wasn't just a charity, Eleanor. It was a laundromat. People donated millions thinking they were helping orphans in South America. In reality, that money was moved through accounts in your name, because you were the safe widow with a flawless reputation, and then funneled to Robert's accounts in the Caribbean. Julian was the face, but Robert was the architect. The SUV turned sharply, heading toward the George Washington Bridge. They weren't going to her home. "Where are we going?" Eleanor asked, a new fear prickling her skin. "Your house in Scarsdale is already compromised," Marcus said. "My team detected a breach 3 minutes after the cuffs went on Julian. Trevor, Julian's assistant, isn't just an employee. He's a specialist hired by the people Robert is currently in debt to. We're going to a safe house in New Jersey. We need to go through that blue folder, Eleanor. We need the physical copies of the Alpha Omega contracts Julian made you sign." Eleanor leaned back against the leather seat, closing her eyes. She felt foolish. She was a woman who had taught The Great Gatsby to generations of teenagers, warning them about the hollow rot behind the American dream. Yet she had missed the rot in her own living room. "He called me boring," she murmured. "What?" Marcus asked. "Julian, on that stage. He called me boring. He said I was a relic." Eleanor opened her eyes, and for the first time they weren't filled with tears. They were filled with a cold, sharpening clarity. "He didn't say it because he believed it. He said it to diminish me, to make sure no one in that room, including myself, ever looked at me as a person with agency. If I'm just a boring old woman, I'm invisible, and invisible people make the best accomplices." Marcus watched her, a look of respect growing in his eyes. "You're starting to see it. That's good, because the people we're dealing with aren't just greedy, they're predatory." They arrived at the safe house, a nondescript suburban home at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, just as the sun began to bleed a pale, sickly gray over the horizon. Inside, the air was stale, and the furniture was covered in plastic sheets. It was a house designed to be forgotten. Marcus led her to a kitchen table and held out his hand for the blue folder. Eleanor laid it out, her fingers smoothing the edges of the paper. As they went through the documents, the scale of the betrayal became clear. Julian hadn't just used her name for accounts. He had made her the primary officer of a logistics company called Vance Global Transit. "Look at the dates, Eleanor," Marcus pointed to a signature page. "This was signed 2 weeks after your 69th birthday, the day Julian took you to that spa in the city." Eleanor remembered that day. She had been so touched. Julian had told her he wanted her to feel pampered. While she was waiting for her massage, he had brought her a standard release form for the spa's insurance. "I signed it while I was in a robe," she whispered, a shudder of revulsion passing through her. "I didn't even have my glasses. I trusted my son." "And here," Marcus flipped to the last page. "This is a transfer of assets. If Julian is ever incapacitated or arrested, the entire legal liability of Vance Global Transit falls on the majority shareholder. That's you, Eleanor. He didn't just use you as a shield. He built a trap door. If the FBI came knocking, he was going to drop you through it and disappear to join his father." The silence in the kitchen was heavy. Eleanor stared at her own signature, loopy, elegant, the signature of a woman who believed in the goodness of family. It looked like a death warrant. Suddenly, Marcus's phone buzzed. He stepped away to take the call, his voice low and urgent. Eleanor watched him, noticing the way his hand hovered near the sidearm holstered at his waist. When he returned, his face was grim. "Julian is talking," Marcus said. "Is he confessing?" Eleanor asked, a flicker of hope in her heart. "No," Marcus replied. "He's doing exactly what the contract was designed for. He's telling the U.S. attorney that he was just a figurehead. He's claiming that you are the one who has been in contact with Robert. He says you were the one who forced him to use the charity to move the money because you couldn't give up the lifestyle you had with your husband." Eleanor gasped, the air leaving her lungs as if she'd been punched. "He's blaming me? He's actually telling them I'm the mastermind?" "He's playing the victim of a domineering mother card," Marcus said. "And the problem is, Eleanor, on paper, it looks plausible. You're the one with the signatures. You're the one who received the insurance payout 10 years ago. You're the one who owns the accounts. But I don't have the money. We know that. But the law follows the ink, not the intent." Marcus leaned across the table. "Eleanor, I can protect you from the physical threats. I can keep you out of the reach of Robert's creditors. But I can't protect you from the justice system unless we get something bigger than Julian. We need Robert." Eleanor looked at the blue folder. She felt a strange, cold sensation. It was as if the woman she had been, the teacher, the wife, the boring mother, was being stripped away, leaving something harder and more dangerous underneath. "Julian thinks I'm a relic," Eleanor said, her voice steadying. "He thinks I'm a story from the 1970s that never ends. Well, he's right about one thing. I know how those stories ended. People in my generation knew how to keep secrets, and we knew how to find them." She looked at Marcus. "There is a second folder. Robert had a safe in the basement of our old house in Connecticut. He told me it was for rare coins. He never gave me the combination, but he used to use our wedding anniversary for everything. Except he didn't use the day we were married." "What did he use?" Marcus asked. "The day he proposed," Eleanor said, a bitter smile touching her lips. "Because that was the day he finally acquired me. He always saw people as acquisitions, Marcus. Even me. If that folder is still there, it could contain the offshore routing numbers we need to track Robert down," Marcus said. "But Trevor and his team are likely already there. They know Julian is in custody. They're scrubbing the sites." "Then we have to get there first," Eleanor said, standing up. "And I know how to get into that house without tripping the security. Robert designed the alarm system, but he forgot that I'm the one who used to let the cat out at 3 a.m. As they moved toward the door, Eleanor caught her reflection in the darkened window of the safe house. She didn't look like a grandmother. She looked like a woman who had spent 40 years being underestimated and was finally ready to use that to her advantage. "One more thing, Marcus," she said as he opened the car door. "Yes?" "When we find Robert, I don't want him just arrested. I want him to see me. I want him to see the acquisition he thought he had buried." Marcus nodded. "I think that can be arranged." As the SUV roared back to life, Eleanor Vance reached into her bag and pulled out a small gold locket. Inside was a picture of Julian as a toddler. She looked at it for a long second, then clicked it shut and tucked it away in a side pocket she wouldn't open again. The boring mother was gone. The huntress had arrived. The rain lashed against the Connecticut countryside, a cold, relentless deluge that seemed intent on washing away the sins hidden beneath the manicured lawns of the wealthy. The black SUV pulled to a stop 2 blocks away from the old Vance estate. Once, this house had been Eleanor's pride, a fortress of red brick and ivy where she had spent 40 years building a life. Now it looked like a hollow tomb, My team is picking up 2 heat signatures inside, Marcus said, his eyes fixed on a thermal imaging tablet. Likely Trevor and another hired hand. They're tearing through the upstairs study. You're sure about the entry point? Eleanor nodded, her dark trench coat pulled tight. The wine cellar has an old ventilation shaft that leads directly to the rose garden. Robert was always more proud of his vintage Bordeaux than his own family. He designed that crawl space so he could sneak out for cigars without me noticing. It's ironic that his secret vice is now my only way in. Marcus signaled to his tactical team. We'll create a diversion at the front and back gates. Eleanor, you have exactly 5 minutes to get into that vault and get the folder. If anything goes sideways, hit this. He handed her a small, silent panic button. Eleanor took a deep breath. She stepped out into the rain, the cold water stinging her skin, but her heart was a furnace. She moved through the familiar thickets, her feet instinctively remembering every stone and root she had tended to for decades. She found the entrance behind a moss-covered stone angel. Eleanor knelt, her hands, once meant for chalk and grading papers, clawing at the rusted iron grate. It was heavy and slick with mud, but she didn't care. She slid into the cramped, dark space, the smell of damp earth and aged oak filling her lungs. Inside the cellar, Eleanor's small flashlight swept over racks of wine worth tens of thousands of dollars. She moved toward the furthest corner, behind a heavy oak cabinet. Robert had always told her this was where he kept his special reserves. She found the hidden catch behind the wood paneling and pressed. Click. The panel slid back, revealing a high-tech digital safe. From upstairs, the sound of crashing furniture and Trevor's muffled shouts drifted down. It has to be here! Julian said the old man kept the hard copies at the house. Eleanor held her breath. Her fingers hovered over the keypad. The proposal date. May 14th, 1974. She punched in 051474. Red light. Access denied. Eleanor froze. Sweat trickled down her spine. Robert hadn't used that date. She tried to think like him. The narcissist. The man who saw life as a game he was destined to win. She tried the date of his first $1 million fraud. No. Julian's birthday? Absolutely not. Robert never saw Julian as a son, only an heir to a project. Heavy footsteps pounded directly above her. Someone was coming down the cellar stairs. Who's down there? Trevor's voice boomed, followed by the terrifying metallic slide of a handgun being readied. Eleanor closed her eyes, desperate. She thought of Robert's vanity. He only ever cared about one person, one position, one legacy. She punched in 010101, number 1, the only thing that ever mattered to him. Thump. The safe door swung open. Inside, there was no gold or jewelry, only a thick file encased in waterproof plastic and an old satellite phone. Eleanor grabbed them just as a beam of light cut across the room. Hey, someone's in here! Trevor yelled. Eleanor scrambled back into the ventilation shaft, mud ruining her silk blouse, her lungs burning. She burst out into this garden just as Trevor emerged from the cellar, gun drawn. Stop right there, Trevor fired. The shot shattered the head of the stone angel. Marcus's team returned fire, pinning Trevor down. Go! Go! Marcus shouted, pulling Eleanor into the shadows. They reached the SUV as sirens began to wail in the distance. Eleanor slumped into the seat, clutching the plastic-wrapped folder to her chest. You got it, Marcus said, his voice laced with genuine shock. You actually got it. Eleanor opened the folder under the dim amber light of the car. The pages were filled with names, routing numbers, and photos. But they weren't photos of business deals. They were photos of her. Eleanor sleeping. Eleanor at the grocery store. Eleanor teaching. Each one was annotated in Robert's sharp, cold handwriting. Stable asset. Tier 1 shield. Easily manipulated. But the final page was the true dagger. It was a secret codicil to a trust. Robert had arranged that in the event of his death, the vast majority of the laundered funds wouldn't go to Julian. They were set to be transferred to a private account held by Sienna, her daughter-in-law. The twist hit Eleanor like a physical blow. Julian thought he was the partner. He thought he was the heir. But Robert had been grooming Sienna all along. Sienna was younger, colder, and shared Robert's sociopathic lack of empathy. Sienna, Eleanor whispered. She wasn't just Julian's wife. She was Robert's eyes and ears inside my own home. Marcus looked at the documents. This explains why she was so calm when Julian was arrested. She knew he was going to prison, and she was the only one left to collect the prize. The satellite phone in Eleanor's hand suddenly vibrated. An unknown number flashed on the screen. Marcus signaled her to answer and put it on speaker. "Eleanor?" a voice crackled, deep, gravelly, and unmistakably Robert's. The voice she had listened to for 40 years. "I have to admit I'm impressed. I expected you to spend the night weeping in a police station, not crawling through crawl spaces." "You're alive, Robert," Eleanor said, her voice hard and sharp as a diamond. "And you're just as cowardly as the day you left." "Cowardly? No, I'm a realist," Robert chuckled. "You've taken something that doesn't belong to you, Eleanor. That folder is my exit strategy. Hand it over to Sienna, and I'll ensure you have a very comfortable, very quiet retirement in the countryside. Don't make this complicated. You know you're not a match for me." "You called me boring, Robert, you and your son," Eleanor said. "You thought I was a piece of furniture you could put in storage, but you forgot one thing. It was the boring wife who managed your household, who raised the son you broke, and who kept the Vance name clean for a decade while you hid in the shadows." "Eleanor, don't take that teacher's tone with me. I'm not a teacher anymore, Robert. I'm the woman who owns your legacy," Eleanor interrupted. "I don't want your money. I'm going to use this folder to burn down everything you've built. I'm going to make the name Robert Vance the most hated word in American finance." "You wouldn't dare," Robert hissed, his confidence flickering. "Julian will rot in a cell if you turn that over." Eleanor looked at the locket in her bag, the picture of Julian as a toddler. She thought of him on that stage, auctioning her off for $2. She felt a profound, cold peace. "Julian signed his own death warrant the moment he put a price tag on my dignity," Eleanor said. "And as for you, Robert, enjoy the dark, because I'm coming to turn the lights on." She cut the call and looked at Marcus. "We need to find Sienna. She's the final link, and I know exactly where she'll go to collect the first transfer." Marcus Thorne looked at the woman beside him. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was a grandmaster who had been playing a different game all along. "What's the plan?" Marcus asked. Eleanor smiled, a cold, elegant expression. "Sienna loves a spectacle. She loves power. So let's give her a performance she'll never forget." The SUV roared into the night, heading toward the heart of Manhattan. Eleanor Vance was no longer running. She was hunting. The penthouse at the Pierre was exactly as Eleanor remembered it, cold, sterile, and smelling of overpriced lilies. Sienna stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights reflecting in her eyes like jagged glass. She was holding a champagne flute in one hand and a burner phone in the other. She didn't look like a grieving wife. She looked like a woman who had just won the lottery. "I expected the FBI, Eleanor," Sienna said, not bothering to turn around. "I didn't expect a schoolteacher with mud on her shoes." Eleanor stepped into the room, her silhouette sharp against the white marble. Marcus and his team were silent shadows in the hallway, waiting for the signal. "The schoolteacher is retired, Sienna," Eleanor said, her voice steady. "And the mud? That's from the grave you and Robert dug for me. I decided not to stay in it." Sienna turned, a mocking smile playing on her lips. "Julian was always so dramatic. He wanted to humiliate you for the art of it. But Robert? Robert is practical. He knew that as long as you were the face of the scandal, the money could move through the back door. And that back door belongs to me now." "You really think he'll let you keep it?" Eleanor asked, walking toward the center of the room. "Robert doesn't have partners. He has tools. Julian was a hammer. I was a shield. And you? You're just a suitcase, Sienna. Once you've moved this money, he'll discard you just as easily as he discarded us." Sienna's smile flickered. "I'm not Julian. I have the encryption keys. He can't move a cent without me." "And I have the hard copies," Eleanor countered, holding up the blue folder. "The ones that link the Vance Global Transit shipments to the exact GPS coordinates of Robert's villa in St. Bart's. The ones that prove you weren't just a wife, but a knowing participant in international arms smuggling." Sienna's face went pale. She reached for the phone on the table, but Eleanor was faster. She laid the satellite phone she'd taken from the safe next to the folder. "He's on the line, Sienna, or he was," Eleanor said. "He's watching us right now through the security feed. Why don't you ask him yourself? Ask him if the retirement he promised you includes a one-way trip to a Caribbean prison." Suddenly, the satellite phone rang. The sound was jarring in the quiet penthouse. Sienna stared at it, her confidence crumbling. She picked it up, her hand trembling. "Robert?" she whispered. Sienna? The gravelly voice came through, but it sounded different now, distorted, panicked. The accounts are being frozen. What did she do? What did that old woman do? Eleanor leaned over the phone, her face inches from Sienna's. I didn't do anything, Robert. I just gave Marcus Thorne the one thing you taught me to value, a perfect record. Every shipment, every signature, every lie. It's all being uploaded to the Federal Reserve server as we speak. You're bluffing, Robert hissed. You'd destroy Julian too. Julian destroyed himself the second he stepped on that stage, Eleanor said, her voice echoing with a profound, cold power. I'm just finishing the auction. And the opening bid for your location, Robert? It was $5 million. Marcus Thorne just cleared the payment. On the wall-mounted television, a news alert broke. International manhunt. FBI raids St. Bart's Villa in connection to Vance charity fraud. The color drained from Sienna's face. She dropped the champagne glass. It shattered on the marble, a sound that signaled the end of the Vance dynasty. You're a monster, Sienna hissed at Eleanor. No, Eleanor replied softly. I'm a mother who finally realized that boring is just another word for patient. And I've been patient for 40 years. Marcus Thorne stepped into the room, his team moving with surgical precision to secure Sienna. He walked up to Eleanor and took the blue folder. We got him, Eleanor, Marcus said. They picked him up on the tarmac. He was trying to board a private jet to South America. Eleanor nodded. She felt a weight lift from her chest, but it wasn't joy. It was a somber, quiet peace. She walked to the window and looked out at New York. She thought of the 30 years she spent teaching teenagers about the tragedy of the Great Gatsby, about people who smashed up things and creatures and then retreated back into their money. She wasn't going to let the Vances retreat. 1 year later, the ballroom at the Pierre was filled once again, but the atmosphere was different. The Bright Future logo had been replaced by the Eleanor Vance Foundation for Educational Equity. The crowd was different, too. Not just the elite, but the teachers, the social workers, and the students Eleanor had once inspired. Eleanor stood at the podium. She wore a simple navy suit. No diamonds, no tight necklaces. Her hair was a natural, beautiful silver. A year ago, she began, her voice carrying across the silent room. My son stood on this stage and told you I was worth $2. He told you I was a relic of a boring past. A few people in the audience shifted uncomfortably, remembering the scandal. He was half right, Eleanor continued with a small, knowing smile. I am a relic. I'm a relic of a time when your word meant something. When a name wasn't a brand, but a promise. And when a mother's love wasn't a resource to be mined, but a foundation to be respected. She looked toward the back of the room where Marcus Thorne stood, a guest of honor. My son tried to sell my dignity for applause, Eleanor said. My husband tried to hide his crimes behind my silence. They thought because I was quiet, I was empty. But as every teacher knows, the quietest rooms are often where the most important work is being done. She paused, looking at a young girl in the front row, a scholarship recipient. To the women out there who feel invisible, Eleanor said, her voice rising with a newfound strength. To the mothers who have been told they are past their prime, remember this. Your value is not a bid at an auction. It is not a number in a bank account. Your value is the truth you carry. She stepped away from the mic as the room erupted into a standing ovation. This time, it wasn't a polite, high society clap. It was thunderous. As she walked off the stage, she saw Julian in her mind. Not the man in the orange jumpsuit she visited once a month, but the boy he used to be. She still loved him, in the way only a mother can, but she no longer carried his sins. She walked out of the hotel and into the crisp afternoon air. The sun was bright, the sky was clear, and for the first time in her life, Eleanor Vance was exactly who she was meant to be. She wasn't a wife, she wasn't a shield, she was Eleanor, and she was anything but boring.